I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dean Timothy George, Dean of the Becson Divinity School at Samford University, will give our invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, on this night of thanksgiving and remembrance, we praise Thee and we bless Thee for every mercy of the past and for Thy present still. Be Thou yet our guide and our one sure hope forever. Teach us to number our days that we may live our lives not carelessly nor flippantly, but coram Deo before Thee in the light of eternity. On this night, we thank Thee for the life and witness of our friend Gerow Hodges, for his courage, his faith in Thee, and for the stewardship of a life invested in the things that matter most. As we seek to honor him, may we also honor You. And for others not here tonight but known to Thee, we remember and bless their memory in Thy presence. Even as we thank Thee for the bounty of food that nourishes and sustains us for journeys yet incomplete. O Holy Spirit, come into our hearts and grant us charity with fear. Guard us, O Christ, from all evil, and so warm and inflame us with Thy suffering love, shown so clearly one Friday in Jerusalem. O Holy Father, gentle Lord, help us in every need, and keep us close to Thee, now and forever, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated. About 5 years ago, I began to work on Gerow to let me borrow some of his documents and read some of his division history. And as you might know, Gerow is always more interested in what other people need than what he has. About April of last year, I was able to look at some of the documents and realize these were museum quality World War II historical documents, and that this was a story that needed to be told. And by then I began accumulating a scrapbook, and with the help of Davis Library and Elizabeth Wells, and with Gerow's help, we began to accumulate documents and newspaper clippings, and I presented to Tom Courts, our president, the book that I had was now 4 inches thick, and said, I think there's a story here, and it's more than just an oral history. I think this is worthy of a film documentary if we can get somebody to do it. Tom looked it over, and he agreed, and then he began to make inquiry of someone who could produce a documentary. We were referred to T.N. Mohan of Huntsville, Alabama, who has produced some award-winning documentaries. We have been to the National Archives. We've dealt with museums in France and the Imperial War Museum, and talked to veterans, and it's been a joy just to bring together this bit of history which would have otherwise been lost.
From the American lines, a group of captured Nazis marched toward an agreed-upon meeting place. Arrangements have been made with the German commander for an exchange of prisoners. And from behind the enemy lines, a similar group of captured Allied troops converges on the rendezvous. Formal negotiations for the exchange are held as the two columns wait impatiently for release to their own forces. The Nazi officers reach an agreement with the Red Cross representative, Gerow Hodges, and other Allied officials. At the conclusion, what looks like a small riot turns out to be a joyful celebration. Smiling and confident, they are ready to witness the serious business of stemming the Nazi tide.
I would at this time like to recognize the 12 former prisoners of war and distinguished veterans who honor us with their presence today. George Boyd, George was a member of K Company. 301st Infantry was on the patrol when which was ambushed, and the fort a brave fight for 5 hours until they were the relief column could not break through, and they were forced to surrender after they ran out of ammunition.
Well, when we left that morning to go out on that patrol to pick up the Germans, we had no idea that we would meet any resistance. And when we got out to where we were supposed to pick them up, there was nobody there. And they radioed back to the captain, "There's no one here." And he says, "Well, just keep going till you find somebody." Well, we walked on for a while and ran into somebody, which they had us surrounded. They had been watching us. The first scout was killed immediately, and I'm not sure when the second or third went down, but I was a rifleman. Bernie was a rifleman. We started pulling back to get back into the little roadway that we had come down, which had hedgerows on both sides. We figured we could get into there and keep them off of us. And in the process of getting back to that little roadway, the Germans had swung around and was in position to cut us off from getting in.
George is here with his wife Gladys. We're glad to have you. George Boyd. Thank you, George. George Brady. George Brady typifies the maxim, as he said to me over the phone, never volunteer to anything in the United States Army. George was a scout, which they said they needed a scout for this patrol, and he said, "All right, I'll serve," and the rest is history.
The lead scout was shot and killed, and it was further down the hedgerow, so I couldn't see it, and then there were some more shots, and then there was a retreat back between the hedgerows, and somehow I was assigned to guard the rear with these Free French and George Westmoreland and myself, and we were between the hedgerows, and they were coming around the corner, and there was a lot of firing going on, and then the Germans started dropping in a lot of fragmentary mortars, and I got wounded in a lot of places, but nothing very serious. And George got very badly damaged. His leg got badly damaged, and as you read, probably there were 5 killed and 26 wounded of the group.
George agreed to scout for the 301st Platoon and lived through imprisonment and continued on into the campaign into Germany as a scout for Patton's army, and was one of the first to cross the River.
Later on, I went down, and as a scout I went across the Saar River and to Saarbrücken, I think that's right, and then I came back, and then they decided they weren't going to stop. Patton wanted to keep on moving, and so I went across with a tank, first tank across the Saar River.
Back in the United States, he has been one of the leaders in the emphasis for low-cost economical housing for our country. Worked for Jim Rouse and was in charge of the development team that developed Columbia, Maryland. He has a passion for affordable housing in our country. George headed up the National Housing Partnerships, which had some 90,000 mostly inner-city low-cost housing, and then he worked with the Enterprise Foundation.
And it was marvelous to go to opening of some project where some elderly lady would say, "You know, I have never had an apartment, a room of my own. I've always had somebody there living in the same room with me. I've never had my own bathroom." And this was wonderful to see the joy and comfort and what it meant.
He is here with his wife, Nomita. I give you George Brady. Thank you, George. Roy Knetzer. Roy is a good Tennessee boy. He was a sergeant in this patrol that I've talked about. His wife, Mary Ruth, received a letter from one of his mates when he was declared missing in action, sending a $40 money order saying that this had been given to him for safekeeping, and he wanted to pass it along to his wife, and he hoped maybe that Roy was a prisoner of war, and that He was, in fact, a prisoner, and he's seen in one of the photographs of the military funeral that the Germans gave for members of his patrol that was killed in action.
We fought them for about 5 or 6 hours that day. The time we got down there is mid-morning, I guess. And so we fought them at about dark, and we was running out of ammunition. So they told us that they tried to get help down to us, but never could reach us. So at dark, while right before dark, we tried to surrender, and they wasn't going to let us surrender. Said that they didn't get the word around. They had us surrounded, and some of them was maybe on the east side didn't know we was trying to surrender. Those on the left side, and they'd open up on us every time we'd try to surrender.
He wrote his wife of his appreciation for the Red Cross. Quote, "We would have starved but for the Red Cross parcels." He's here with his wife Mary Ruth and Donna, his daughter, and I give you Roy Knatzer from Tennessee. Kermit Hardin, after 2 years of, if you'll stand, Kermit, after 2 years at the University of Illinois, he went in the Army and found plenty of action when he reached Europe.
They pretty soon radioed in and said the reinforcements were there, but they couldn't get through. And so we were running low on ammunition, and there were several that had been killed, several wounded. Germans were pouring mortars in on us and everything else. It just looked like a bad situation.
He was wounded in France, imprisoned, wounded again in Germany, and got the Silver Star for action in Germany when he took over a squad after the squad leader was wounded. He led a charge that overran a German position, killing 20 Germans, capturing 20 others.
You have this terrific battle where you don't really know what's going to happen. Then when you surrender, of course, everything gets quiet, and then you are apprehensive about how you're going to be treated and things of that sort.
He was glad to return to the quiet life of academia, and later served as the superintendent of schools for Urbana, Illinois. He's here with his wife, Ann. Kermit Hardin. Harry Glickson. Wave your hand, Wave your hand, Harry. We see you over there. He's in a wheelchair, but boy, he is got all kind of spirit, and we're so glad to have him here. This is a man who left his job at the Brooklyn Navy Yard to go and enlist in the Army. That's real courage in my book. He joined the Army and was in the K Company patrol when it was ambushed. He was a radio operator and was calling in artillery fire within 50 meters of his position. That's close. Take it from me. That is very close. 50 yards from your position.
As we started across the meadows, we had our first shot of war. We all suddenly realized this is not a one-sided war. They want to kill us as much or more than we want to kill them. I saw the scout being hit. I saw him slowly sink to the ground, and in deep, one of the others was hit also, but he didn't die right away. One of them died right away. We saw our first signs of heroism as one of our people went over, picked him up, and started to take him towards the hedgerow. The hedgerow, which is about 50 feet away, is an item about 6 to 7 feet high, thin at the top and down to the base. The lieutenant said to me, "Call for artillery, because we need us to protect our group." So I got on the radio and told him a little bit of where we were. And I said, "Give me concentration 15, point shot," which means, to be translated, they give us one artillery round on the ground, which then becomes a point of reference for future shots.
When the battle cleared, captured enemy documents said that they found 100 enemy bodies and many more wounded. He was decorated for bravery. He's a hero to us.
It was amazing to me how suddenly we were different human beings. Suddenly we were no longer involved with any controversy between us. It was save each other, do for each other. This is no time to fool around with anything.
Harry Glickson is here with his wife, Lorraine. Harry. Bernie Rader. Stand up, Bernie. During the ambush, Bernie was hit by a mortar round. That doesn't exactly clear your head. Bernie was seriously injured, and thanks to the quick thinking of his tent mate, George Boyd, who I've previously introduced, they buried his dog tag so that the Germans would not know that he was Jewish.
I asked Boyd, my friend, to get my dog tags out and put them into the ground. And after that, the Germans, the Americans, some of the Americans said, we have to surrender. And then after that, George helped me to get, the Germans were still there, and we went out from where the people were there.
Bernie was hit by a mortar shell. I got hit by a mortar shell. Bernie was hit worse than I was. And finally decided that we can't get out. We couldn't get any help. And the sergeant was in charge then after the lieutenant had been shot in the head, and he couldn't do nothing else. And Bernie was trying to get his dog tags off. He's a Jewish boy. I took his dog tags off and buried them for him so the Germans wouldn't know he was a Jew.
Bernie was placed in a wheelbarrow by the Germans and to be wheeled off to the outpost. And as the Germans lifted him out of the wheelbarrow, he tried to walk a few steps and hit a wire, and he thought he'd set off a booby trap. And seriously injured Bernie Rader leaped over a 6-foot-high hedgerow, much to the amusement of his German captors. He's here with his wife, Ruth, and we're thankful that Bernie made it. Bernie Rader. Dr. Bill Reynolds was First Lieutenant Bill Reynolds from El Paso, Texas, and he asked the question, what's more dangerous than a ride with a New York cabbie? Try riding in an ambulance where the driver loses his way and goes into German territory and hits a landmine.
When we moved from Brest into the Lorient area, we set up our hospital, but the first assignment that I got was to go out and find sources of supplies, medical, groceries, commissary supplies, just everything that you need to operate any kind of a military unit. And so that was what we were doing when we ran over this landmine. And the explosion threw me out of the vehicle. I landed in a ditch on the side of the road, and when I stopped rolling, I stood up and realized that I'd better sit back down because my right leg was not working. And almost immediately it started hurting. And as soon as I sat down, a group of Germans came out of the bushes from the side of the road and surrounded me, and all I remember is that looking into the black holes in the end of their Schmeisser pistols. That's their automatic weapons, and those little black holes were just very devastating, very unnerving.
He was carried on a stretcher and spent most of his time in captivity as the only American in a hospital bunker full of German soldiers. The Germans actually lifted him up from the ditch where he was blown, placed him on a stretcher with his boot. He was seriously injured in his foot, and he was still clutching the boot when he was loaded into the ambulance to go to the exchange point. The exchange took place over many hours, and there were 3 people lying on stretchers in the ambulance as they waited and waited and waited, and their bladders got more and more full. And Bill Reynolds found a new use for the boot that day. I told him we have an old Southern expression about being dumbass, or too dumb to do. But he would pass the boot out, and the German medic would empty it, and he'd pass it back. And he's here with his wife Ruth and half of El Paso, Texas. The whole Reynolds family is here. Will you all stand, please? Bill Reynolds, all the Reynolds family. Thank you, thank you. Morris Schulman. While on the, I love this, while on the Ile de Grace with an group of American prisoners, they were put into a German work party. The Germans said, we need some radio parts unloaded down at the dock. By the time they got to the unloading point, there were no more radio parts left. Bernie's work team found themselves, they did it one time, and the Germans found they had to find somebody that could get there with more parts than Morris's group could do.
When we were in Ile de Grace, they tried to have us work, and they took us down to the port one time and had us bring up radios or parts. I don't even remember what it was. So everybody lost them on the way up, got rid of them, and they never put us back to work again. Then we used to take walks. And during the walks, for exercise, the French people used to give us bread and butter, and that was the only extra food that we had. We were really very hungry, and finally they got orders not to let us accept food from the French, and that was the end of the walks.
Morris was in the group on Ile de Grace. He lost 35 pounds in the short time that he was, the months that they were there, because of the poor diet, developed pellagra, and recovered. One of the most shocking things that Morris shared with us as late as April 1945, long after he'd been freed, his sister wrote a letter to him. It was returned by the Army marked on the outside of the Army, deceased. And he wasn't. He's here, and we're proud to have him, let me tell you. Morris Schulman and his wife, Valerie. Thank you. James Silva, originally from Boston, no stranger to Alabama. Was a pilot and did his pre-flight down at Maxwell Air Force Base. He did so well on his first mission, and you'll hear about this, that the government called him back during the Korean War and let him fly 33 more.
I was flying a P-51 on this mission, and it was equipped with cameras, and with the guns were loaded for defensive reasons, and we were flying south toward the area of Saint-Nazaire, France. East of Saint-Nazaire, I got hit by anti-aircraft fire, and the plane caught fire, and I had to bail out, and so I did so, and I was supposed to release the canopy and then climb out the side and slide off the trailing edge of the wing. I was going to be a nice, cool 20-year-old, so I didn't. I rolled back the canopy with the crank handle and poked it into the hole in the side of the disc. I started out. I had forgotten to disconnect my headset and my throat mic, so I slid back in, disconnected them, and as I slid out, my knee hit the handle, knocked it out, and the slipstream closed the canopy on me when I was half in and out. And by this time, the plane was in a steep dive, and I knew it, so I was struggling, trying to get out, kicking and pushing and pulling, and I finally did get out, but if I had stayed in the plane another 1.5 seconds, I would have gone in with the plane. So I just got out. In fact, I was out so late, I thought I was going to land in the burning airplane, and but I didn't. So I gathered up my chute. I heard gunfire, and I thought, oh boy, they're shooting at me. So I ran across the field, and of course the shroud lines were dragging, and they kept catching on little bushes, and I would tumble down. I think my legs kept right on going, and I dove over a hedgerow, seeking protection there.
It's good to have him here with us. His wife Dorothy was not able to be with him. James Silva. Thank you. Wayne Stewart. Wayne and his wife Vivian came the longest way from Wenatchee, Washington. That's the state of Washington. And we're so glad to have him with him. He went from the exchange point with his unit to the Battle of the Bulge, and it took a sniper's wound through his chest to get him a ticket home to the United States.
Our K Company ended up in this area that was known as the Siegfried Line. We were complete with concrete pillboxes, concrete obstructions for tanks, and well defended by because it protected their flank and the bulge area. And we remained there and fought until the end of January. I was shot by a sniper 27th of January 1945, and after 5 days in the hospital, flown to England for medical care and remained there until mid-March of 45.
He and his wife have been back to Ile de Graw and the area where he was kept prisoners. They met women who, as teenage girls, recall giving apples to the American prisoners of war.
La mi-octobre, les Américains prisonniers passaient dans le village où j'habitais, au centre, à gauche en montant. Ils passaient avec la carriole, ils étaient 5 ou 6, accompagnés de sentinelles allemandes avec leurs fusils. Et ils passaient tous les matins pour aller puiser de l'eau dans 2 puits qui étaient au-delà du village. Et ils avaient faim, et nous aussi. Alors, comme nous avions eu du pain blanc par la Croix-Rouge, nous avions fait des sandwichs. Et comme le cochon avait été tué, on leur donnait du pâté de toutes sortes. Et ils rentraient dans la maison, mais les Allemands restaient dans la rue. Et tous les jours, ils passaient. Ils en passaient peut-être pendant 1 mois à peu près. Et sans doute, ils ont dû être échangés. Et avant de s'en aller, il y avait un monsieur aux cheveux roux. J'étais jeune, un monsieur aux cheveux roux et qui avait été blessé. Il marchait difficilement et il était entré pour m'apporter une petite boîte à couture avec des bobines de fil et puis des aiguilles. Ça devait faire partie de son trousseau de soldat.
We were allowed to walk outside, and the French might say something to us or sneak an apple or so. They didn't have all that much to give away, but they certainly were willing to share what they had. And then we returned, marched back to the fort, and shared our goodies with the rest of the men.
They were invited into the homes of French people, and as Vivian said, they were amazed at the incredible hospitality of the French, who were so appreciative. And we're appreciative too for you, Wayne. Wayne Stewart and his wife, Vivian. Thank you. Harold Thompson. Harold Thompson, former Mobile boy, who at 19 years old was a sergeant heading a patrol that was ambushed in the Saint Nazaire sector.
I was trying to find a way to destroy those submarine pens in Saint Nazaire, France. We had been unsuccessful in trying to bomb them. The British made a commando raid and the French made a commando raid, neither of which was successful. They were all either killed or captured. And I didn't know that at the time. If I had, I might not have volunteered, but I did. And the mission was to find out some way to destroy these submarine pens, maybe point blank artillery fire or something. So I was trying to figure out a way to get into that location close enough to destroy those submarine pens.
Most of his patrol was lost, and he was sent to the prison at Saint Nazaire, which was unmarked, and for that reason was subject to being shelled, bombed, strafed. He made a protest to the Germans one time, and they responded by putting him in solitary confinement.
I was determined to survive. I wasn't going to let those people take my life. I would, if I gave my life, it was going to be trying to escape, because I knew that the diet we were getting would not sustain us forever. And I stole a screwdriver once, and during a real heavy rainstorm, I sat down on my behind trying to pick the lock. Now, the guards that we had at the time were elderly German soldiers. But when I dropped that screwdriver, it made so much noise, the old German guard outside the door just opened fire right through the top part of the door. And if I'd been standing, I'd have been decapitated. So they yanked me off in solitary confinement again, and they replaced these old Army German guards with young Marine German guards. So they really cracked down on us, and they were worse on us than the old guys were. So we endured more harsh treatment than we'd had previously.
His most vivid recollection is one that's shared by several others who were in that encampment, and that was from at evening to when things got quiet. There was a British private by the name of George Tegg. You see he's being checked by the Germans before his swap. Had a beautiful tenor voice and would sing, and Harold and others say that they don't hear today the song Danny Boy without getting somewhat choked up as they remember Tegg. Harold Thompson. Thank you, Harold. David Trachtenberg. I wrote it. He's a native of Wurtsboro, New York. He was hospitalized in Lorient after being wounded in the K Company ambush.
Sergeant Harrington asked me, since I did know some German, to say we wanted to surrender, because apparently the raising of the white flag hadn't clicked with the enemy. They perhaps didn't understand what that was about. So I yelled as loud as I could in incorrect German, "Wir wollen uns aufgeben." They understood, even though the correct expression I learned later is "Wir wollen uns ergeben." But they understood what we're conveying to them, and they gave us instructions on dropping our weapons and marching out with our hands above our heads.
Just got to know some of the Germans. Tells a story of being next to one. David speaks some German, and one of the Germans shared with him that it looks like Germany was going to lose the war.
And of course that was the downfall of Karl Weiner, because at some point he admitted that he believed that Germany couldn't win the war, or words to that effect. There was a new patient in the bed that Chester Taka had previously occupied, and he was an SS sergeant with a very bad cold, and he screamed and yelled, and people came and took Karl Weiner away. And from what I was told later, he got 30 days in the brig.
David received his doctorate in education from NYU and a law degree from the University of Florida. He served as a staff attorney on Florida's 4th District Court of Appeals. He's here with his wife, Selma. They live in Lake Worth, Florida. David Trachtenberg. I'm going to ask now two of our prisoners, one from Saint Nazaire, one from Lorient, to come up. And Jim Silva, if you'll come up and give us just a few moments of recollection.
We didn't get treated too badly. We weren't tortured or beaten or anything, but the food was terrible. I managed to lose about 15 pounds in 2.5 months. And for breakfast, we had Ersatz coffee, and Dunkin' Donuts had this. They go out of business the first day. Then we had thin soup for lunch. As Harold said, you could read a newspaper through the soup. And for dinner, we had a loaf of bread, which was shared by 4 or 5 people. And very occasionally, we might get a little cheese. We tried a few escapes, not too successfully. The Germans got annoyed, so they built a house inside the hangar building and put us in there with a fence around there. And even with all that, we got 4 people out. We got the British Captain Michael Foote and the French Lieutenant Rawlins, and 2 Americans, the Lieutenant Keller and the Flight Officer Neurelius.
We simply clambered over a 14-foot, not very well put up barbed wire fence and got out into the open. When Neurelius and Keller went one way and Leo and I went the other, we got clean out of the camp. Another wonderful night for escaping. Drenching rain.
On a choisi une direction, mais constamment, on n'a pas pu prendre un chemin, une route. On a traversé le terrain de tourbe, donc on était obligé de passer à travers les ruisseaux partout. On était complètement mouillé, on a marché comme ça 1 ou 2 heures probablement.
In the suburbs of Saint-Nazaire, again we stumbled on a sentry who said, "Who the hell are you?" To which Rollin replied, in impeccable German with an upper class accent, "How dare you talk to an officer in that tone of voice? Stand to attention and speak to me." The chap said, "So fair," clicked his heels, and we went on. We came to a farmhouse exactly as described in the escape books. No sign of a telephone, no sign of a motor vehicle, no sign of enemy occupation. We found an open window, let ourselves in. We turned out to have let ourselves into the main bedroom. Monsieur lit a candle and said, "Who the hell are you?" And I left it to Leo with his perfect trick to do all the explaining, and he explained. We were 2 prisoners of war in escape, looking for somewhere dry to spend the night if we possibly could. He let out a bellow, and his 2 sons came in, wielding pitchforks, hit me on the forehead and hit me again on the neck as I fell, cut Leo badly about the face.
Il est tombé inanimé, j'ai eu très peur. J'ai compris que peut-être il avait été tué ou non. J'ai compris que je ne peux pas laisser comme ça.
Leo, bless his heart, carried me away over his shoulder, out through the window. I, by this time, was unconscious. Took me down a track from the farm till he found a haystack to put me in. Went on till he found some Germans.
Je suis tombé sur quelques soldats russes en uniforme allemand. Je leur ai expliqué, en tout cas ils ont compris ce qui s'est passé. Ils ont pris donc soin de Foote, ils l'ont ramené chez les Allemands par voie, j'espère, par voie médicale. Et moi, ils m'ont rendu aux Allemands directement. Le lendemain matin, ils m'ont ramené au camp.
Michael sent me an email to be read at this time, and he said, "After many years' work on the history of the war against Hitler, I remain proud of our record as prisoners of war in Saint-Nazaire. For us, the war was not over, as the Germans told us it was. We remained a tiny thorn in the hide of the Nazi beast. Quite how nasty the beast was only became clear later, when much worse camps than ours were freed. It remained a task for all honest men to be ready to stand up against tyranny, as no American needs to be reminded after 11 September last year. And all of us who survived from the Saint-Nazaire camp owe a lasting debt of gratitude to Gerow Hodges for having got us out of it. I above all. When I first met him, I was dying quietly in a German military hospital and was so confused, I had a broken neck and a cracked skull, that I took him to be a German agent, till he slipped a message from my father into what he was saying. When the man for whom I was to be exchanged failed to turn up, Gerow volunteered to become a prisoner himself until I did. I much wish I could have been with you all tonight to celebrate our debt to him. I trust you are doing so with something more appetizing than turnip soup and acorn coffee. Every possible good wish to you all, Michael Foote.
Captain Foote and Lieutenant Rawlins were later recaptured, and as you've heard, Michael Foote was very seriously injured. Lieutenant Keller and Flight Officer Neurelius made it back to American lines. During this time, my parents only had information that I was missing in action. And around November 12th, they got a letter from me through the Red Cross that I was alive and a POW. So I say kudo to Gerow Hodges and the Red Cross for opening up our camp to the world and letting the world know we were there. After that, we I guess we managed to get an exchange going. We heard about November 24th from high-ranking officers that there was going to be an exchange, but I didn't believe them because ever since we had the escape, they were trying to figure out how we did it, and they kept promising us all kinds of things if we tell them how we did it. And so I didn't believe them, but on Wednesday, November 29th, we marched to our freedom. And thanks to Gerow's persistent negotiating with the Germans, we were now free. And I think of it as a small step for humanity and a large step for us. If we had stayed in the camp for another 6 months or so till the end of the war, on the limited quantity diet and the lack of nourishment that we had, who knows what diseases or physical and mental degradation we would have had. And so we were thankful to get out when we did get out. I had no permanent physical or mental degradation, despite what my wife may say. In fact, I was back in the service a few years later, as you heard, and I was over in Korea, and I flew 33 missions as a night attack pilot, flying up and down the dark valleys of Korea. And my highlight there was I took a fully loaded airplane off a 150-foot cliff into a rice paddy down below, and bombs broke in half and scattered around. The engines were ripped off the nacelles, and the plane was totaled. And I walked away with a bump on my head and a cut on my finger. So I think I never met Gerow before tonight. My paths touched very briefly, and I was the better man for it. Thank you, Gerow.
Wayne Stewart. So, K Company, 301st Infantry, 94th Infantry Division.
Thank you, Gerow. Thank you, Gerow. Or Hobart, sorry. It's a privilege to have participated in this program this week. Thanks to the University of Samford and the accommodating people that treated us like long-lost relatives, and we appreciate the aid and suggestions and the food and the taxi service and the whole work. We've had a great time. It's been a therapeutic occasion for us veterans to get together. Some of us haven't seen each other in 55 years. And I feel very good about the chance that three of the guys and three of the men in the 12-man squad are here tonight. Trachtenberg, myself, and Hardin, all 3 out of the 12. And we all ended up in the Lorient sector, captured, you heard about. Trachtenberg was in the hospital for a while and then came out to the island. And the island of Gerow is not a vacation wonderland at that time of the year, but it is now a place, of all things, Germans like to go there on vacation, and the French love to have their money. But out on the island, it's about 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide at the widest spot. And this old fort that was built in 1850 by the French to have all of the spices from the Far East had to come through this port so King Louis could administer his tariffs to the things. And they, out on Gerow, they built this fort to help protect the harbor. We're about 5 miles offshore. None of us were athletic swimmers and didn't entertain the idea of trying to swim to freedom. So there we were, and put in this place. Looked like a castle, I thought it was. It had a moat and a drawbridge, an outer wall, and a dungeon, and the whole works. And the guard were pretty accommodating in that they had us to guard as well as do their regular duties. So they confined us to 2 large rooms in the 2nd floor, and we had to get permission to go to the bathroom, or that sort of thing. It was an unheated place. We slept on straw mats in wooden built bunks. The lice and fleas were bad at night. The food was, I thought, around 700 calories a day. 2 slices of bread and 2 tablespoons of lard in the morning for breakfast with artificial coffee, no lunch, and a bean soup at night, very thin and watery. I say 700 calories, but I think it was less than that. For an 18 or 19-year-old kid, it's not adequate to keep you going very far. So we all lost weight. I volunteered for a water detail to haul water to the fort in a little 2-wheel cart and a barrel on it. And 6 of us to go out and pump water at a pump location about a quarter of a mile away and make a couple trips a day. And it was a nice duty to get out of the place and get a little sunshine, a little exercise. The accommodations in the poor food situation really was hard on our health, and I'm convinced that if we had stayed there until the end of the war on the 8th of May, that some of us wouldn't have made it, and it's the best case that we've been in very serious physical health. And so I want to thank Gerow for his efforts in dealing with the situation and arranging for the exchange. And we all give you thanks for that. I'm convinced that you saved my life.
I have never seen Hodges before the day we came here. I know him. I know his name. I know what they did for all of us, but I did not know him before that. We know his name only. When we saw him yesterday, and I saw Hodges, and I came here, and I put my arms around him and told you what we did for us. Thank you so much what you did that. That was greatest things for us. Maybe we could have died, but he did it for us. And I thank you so much for what he did.
This special time, after all of the incidents of 9/11, we're especially mindful of the price paid for our freedom, and we're deeply grateful to each of you. We pay tribute to you this evening, and we're grateful to you for what you did, and we recognize that future generations, ours and those that come after us, will have a hard time equaling the contribution and commitment that you have made, but you've set a wonderful example. We thank you for that. We thank you for joining us this evening and the opportunity to pay a great tribute to our friend Gerow Hodges. As a trustee, there's none finer. He's a man who deeply cares about this institution and loves it. As I've said on many occasions, he bleeds red, white, and blue, which are the colors of his country, but red and blue are also the colors of this university. And we owe him profound thanks for all of his commitment and dedication to this institution, which is much finer because of his efforts. As each of these men will attest, to him they owe their lives and good fortunes. So we give you thanks for being here this evening, and we trust that in this very special experience, each of us will find a renewed reason to be proud of this country and to make a commitment to those values that are so well exemplified in these individuals here tonight. There is one presentation I want to make, Mr. Hodges. This is a framed poster of the event as we described it, and I understand that each of the veterans is going to be asked to sign this poster, and then we'll reframe it for your perpetual care and keeping. And again, I want you to know that that's just a token of all that you mean to us in this community and to Samford University, and we celebrate with you this wonderful opportunity you had to apply your unmatched skills as a negotiator on this special occasion.
Well, thank you, Tom. Grateful to all of you for coming tonight. It's a great honor to be here with all these men and with you, our friends. Thank you so much.
My own dear land, where'er my footsteps wander, ever to thee my heart still turns again. For thee, my love, grows ever fonder, fonder, till in its might it is akin to pain. Ever to thee